It started. Maybe you can start, Anuraj, and go down.
Yeah, the interview is well, only half of it is like I found interesting regarding the scraping part. So I played with the X402 API endpoints, like the payment. So it's a really good concept, but like I don't know how much it actually will work in the general web, uh, because because the internet is built basically for the advertising business model, and then how will, so they are basically going uh, against that business model. So it's a uphill battle, but it does seem that it would work in certain niche uh, like use cases, like for example, if you want to have like a pay per click article on Substack, then all those things with simple stuff, I think it might be a little useful. But I don't know if you can power the entire internet economy without the advertising business model. But with LLMs coming in, so there might be some changes coming, but I don't know how that will play out. And yeah, so those were some initial thoughts. I might come back to it. Passing on to Ben.
Um, I haven't, I didn't quite fully finish the interview, but talking about Cloudflare, Cloudflare is, I think, probably one of the most interesting companies of big tech, in that it's become really critical infrastructure, and the only part of the article talks about that. A lot of it's about like AI stuff, which I mean is interesting in its own right, but I always think of Cloudflare as sort of like the most critical web infrastructure that most people don't understand, where they basically are this huge web, big tech thing, and they basically decide what websites live or die, because they everything has to be behind their firewall if it has any sort of popularity, um, and otherwise it can just get ripped apart on the open web, because sort of like you might have heard, like I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember, like a few decades ago, like there was always these DDoS attacks and things like were going down and there'd be swarms, and like it seemed very rickety, and then over the past few decades that seems to have calmed down and gone away. It's never really gone away. It's just that companies that like Cloudflare sprung up, and they did the hard back end technical work to make these sort of DDoS attacks not really possible. Um, and actually taking things down, which is it's good in the sense that things are now a lot more robust. You can mostly go to a site and expect it to be there, assuming like the creator is can do it properly. Um, but it's if it's down, it's probably the website itself is down, and not like somewhere in between is being DDoS or something. Um, but at the end of the day, that means that they have a huge amount of power. And as you saw in like the past decade, people, if they have that power, it's going to get used against people you don't like, but also people you do like. So, and I don't think people have really come to terms with that. And people, especially in like the decentralization community, I guess, whatever you want to call it. I don't think people think enough about Cloudflare. Like I've heard decentralized hosting. We talked about IPFS and stuff, and I haven't heard anyone be like, oh yeah, this is definitely going to be a decentralized Cloudflare. It almost doesn't make sense, because it's like, if it's truly decentralized, then how do you get DDoSed? How do you get taken down that way? But in practice, because this article doesn't really quite even go into like what technically Cloudflare does. Um, because there's so much like back end work. It's only almost a pure back end company. Like no one ever goes to cloudflare.com unless you're a developer or something. Um, so, how would you like? Yes, if you imagine, so like the ideal decentralization, there's like an infinite number of free floating nodes that you can't even count, and then you just connect to one and get all your data. Then it's not possible to interrupt your connection or DDoS you, if they don't know, like, they're not going after like your exact IP or something. But in practice, things tend to not be that idealized situation, and you can actually end up in situations where the so-called decentralized is actually much easier to attack, because it can't be behind Cloudflare very easily, or you put the servers behind Cloudflare, and and then you suddenly, you're back in Cloudflare's camp. And this is why the AI part is kind of interesting in that you wouldn't expect this random tech company to have a big say over how AI plays out, because they're not even an AI company. They don't do anything like that. But because they're so critical for internet infrastructure, suddenly they actually have a lot of power to decide outcomes. And I know, like, all the big AI players, I'm sure they're talking to Matthew, and they have lines of communication to Cloudflare and so on. And I know he must be part of the conversation, um, but it really just goes to show how powerful he is, because of where he exists in the infrastructure layer. Yeah, and of course, I agree with, like, how to pay for things is always a sticking point, and I'm not sure he's got the right idea on things. But I always get, when I think about Cloudflare, I think the personal stuff falls away, and I just look at the sort of system, and I think it's kind of a crappy system. Like, I mean, not in that it doesn't work very well. It works very well. It's more of the structure that's come up, and I really would like an alternative to this, and I don't know if people are working on it properly. Anyway, I'm moving down to Venkat.
Yeah, so I think I was confused about what Cloudflare actually is until fairly recently. Like, I assumed it is basically a CDN like Akamai or one of those older players, but yeah, reading more into the background, as far as I can understand it, they're unique in basically offering a vertically integrated stack. So this is at least my understanding from ChatGPT conversations. But it's not just a CDN, it's not just a security layer. It's also edge hosting, because it's now competing with things like Netlify. And it's also edge compute. They're doing things that look vaguely similar to AWS Lambda. So and I think they offer DNS registration and things like that as well.
They do. I've actually used it before.
Yeah, and yeah, according to ChatGPT, it has no direct competitor that offers the complete full stack it does, because it offers so much. So I would say it's basically counter cyclical, or like, how do I put it? Like, industry sectors tend to go in cycles between vertical integration and horizontal integration. And sometimes there's like business value in going against the cycle. So if everybody else has organized the industry horizontally and you're the only player offering vertical integration, there's a business to be, I don't know, pursued there. But it tends not to be a very powerful business, because, and I'm laying this out because I think I understand now why I made a mistake I did, like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. I think during the pandemic, briefly Cloudflare stock spiked. I looked at it and didn't understand quite what they were doing, but I got the impression, hey, they're the only ones doing what they're doing, and they seem to have like an idea that uh, beats everybody from AWS to Netlify. Why shouldn't this be the future of the internet? So I bought some Cloudflare stock, but they didn't do very well. So I think my stock is like seriously down or something at this point. But now I kind of get it, because even though they're the only ones doing what they don't actually have a monopoly in doing those things. Like, you can compose a Cloudflare equivalent by subscribing to 3 or 4 other different services in horizontal pieces and integrating them yourself, which I suspect is what everybody else does. Like, use AWS for your hosting and Lambda style functionality. Use something like Akamai for your CDN. If you need static web page hosting, get Netlify. So you can like compose the stack. And I think you see the same weakness showing up in their rhetoric about pay-per-click AI. Like, I didn't fully understand their own technical press release on how they were going to do it, but then I got a ChatGPT to explain it to me, and I shared that chat. This pay-per-click, it'll work only if all your content is behind their CDN layer, which is okay if you're like Associated Press or Reuters or one of those big consolidated information operations, it makes sense for you to give Cloudflare your content hosting contract, and then all the big LLM companies are forced to uh, stick to your pay-per-click model. But it's not really a moat. It's not a really strong defensible model because all these companies who, if you choose to use Cloudflare as your defender, then Cloudflare becomes your monopolistic sort of lock-in partner, and you're completely at their mercy for all their defenses, right? So if they get some clever ideas about how to deal with China or right-wing content or whatever, and you don't agree, you're kind of screwed. And uh, this was clear, like when they first became famous with that Stormfront episode, right? They basically took the right-wing site Stormfront off their hosting, and then Stormfront got DDoS and so forth. But the important question to ask about such episodes is, what if you you may not like the politics of Stormfront, but what happens if you flip it? What happens if that happens to somebody you do like? So, in a way, you kind of have to take Cloudflare's high-minded rhetoric with a pinch of, actually, a huge spoonful of salt here, because they're like correctly pointing out all the bad incentives and moral hazards of the LLM scraping companies, but they're not pointing out the moral hazards of what would happen if their own vision for their own role actually became successful and they managed to interpose themselves as a pay-per-click player, right? So one way I think this could potentially work is if this became more of like a full market, like at least an oligopoly, where there's like multiple Cloudflare type players that I don't know, form some sort of like pay-per-click cartel. So maybe there's an industry-wide standard for how pay-per-click should work, but it can be served by many players that have some minimal capabilities, right? So you need some edge hosting, CDN type capability, and you need some firewall type capability. If you have those two things, I think you can do this. But I don't think this will work, and I think it's better to just go fully decentralized. It's not clear what that would be, some mix of IPFS and zero knowledge or whatever. But it's not obvious to me how you could like truly cartelize this. Like even if you wanted an oligarchy controlling content, it's not actually clear how you would do it and like prevent the really long tail of small to medium content providers who don't have a good reason to sign up for like large scale B2B SaaS CDN type infrastructure. Like me as a blogger, I might sign up for a retail thing like Substack, but there's no good reason for me to like sign up for this level of infrastructure, which means if an LLM company wants to scrape my stuff, it can just do it. By the way, if you look at Substack, I think Substack is blocking LLMs now. So if you give Substack or if you give a ChatGPT a Substack link, it'll say, I can't read it. You have to cut and paste before I can answer, something like that, which I think is kind of stupid. So I think the actual compromise solution in the short term is you just have to give up sort of like scraping revenue and hope that the value of being included in LLM foundation models exceeds the cost of it, right? Like, which I think is currently true if you're small and medium, right? ChatGPT knows about me. If you ask about certain topics, might reference my articles and I get some traffic that way maybe. So it's not that bad a deal. But the future version, I think, might be, there are people trying to make something like robots.txt. It's called LLMs.txt. I know a couple of efforts like this, but that depends on like, the big players playing nice. But they might. But this is, so far they're not. Like, I remember there's at least one reveal of Perplexity obviously ignoring robots.txt and scraping. So I don't think you can bet on their being nice. So I think, yes, short term, you can do something like LLMs.txt. You can do some government regulation to force at least a little compliance with the big guys. So if you're New York Times or Reddit, you can like pay somebody to do the audit and figure out if you're being scraped and like basically force a deal. If you're like some small player, you can't. Or if you're the proxy for a small player like Substack, maybe you can enforce a little bit. But basically, it's all temporary. And I think the full solution is probably decentralized. And yeah, floor is open for more questions now. Anant, I server muted you earlier because your mic was. And I'll unmute you if you have anything to say. Give me a second.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Right, floor is open.
Yeah, I find it interesting that Cloudflare. I mean, to be fair, I haven't done deep research or even talked to ChatGPT much about what Cloudflare actually does technically. So I admit to some ignorance there. But from what Venkat said, it sounds like nothing they do in particular is like super special. It's just integration and being sort of a one-stop shop, which sometimes is if the one-stop shop is bad quality, then often that's not good enough, and then it sort of goes away. But if it's if they are capable of doing all that, people are going to pick that up. So when thinking about like how do you come up with a decentralized alternative to this, that's certainly an interesting question because sort of decentralization tends to be bad at creating one-stop shops. Most for various reasons, but one of the big ones is that to actually make a good, usable one-stop shop, you have to have a lot of people working on it for a long time to actually get all the UX flows to the point where people can actually use them. And it's not like pulling teeth. And so a lot of people say, for a decentralized system, that's impossible. And I think that's not true. I think people underestimate the gap in work between I have created thing and I have actually created this integrated solution that people can just use. And it is very many orders of magnitude. It is quite easy comparatively to like create a decentralized alternative. It is, 2 orders of magnitude more work to make it so like some guy who's just looking for a solution can just grab it and use it. So people vastly underestimate the effort for that. So they get surprised when like, oh yeah, there's this GitHub that does this thing, and it's decentralized. Why doesn't everyone use that? Well, it's not actually a solution. You need a lot of resources and a lot of time, a lot of effort to actually make it a solution. And the whole idea of crypto is that this would have enough money flowing around that could actually do that. That remains to actually be seen if that can actually be pieced together. Anyway, yeah. Is any other comments?
I did read the article, but I didn't. Sorry, I didn't read the article. I didn't go finish the entire article, but I was trying to read, not from like sort of like trying to get a technical understanding of Cloudflare. I was trying to more understand how he thinks, and perhaps is a good indicator of where he thinks the solutions might be. But hearing everyone here, and sort of, I was thinking about it myself on. The solution is definitely not. I mean, Cloudflare. The article started with like 2010, so it's kind of at the sort of, in some sense, grew as a company along with the Web 2 world in some sense, and it's ultimately a gateway and a protection to like a permission set of services. And like I also remember I think 2016 or sometime when they sort of deplatformed Daily Stormer or whatever that publication was, and it made me think about how fragile this infrastructure was. But reading this article, though, it doesn't give me any sort of confidence that they have the right solutions in mind, or if the solutions are even with Cloudflare in the first place. But the solutions might be decentralized, but it makes me very unsure about how long that'll take and the maturity and so on and so forth. So I just thought I'll just add that. And I'll also add the last comment he had in the article on like, remove TikTok as like the application or something from his phone. and he called it all empty calories. And I think that kind of tells his sort of age and like sort of his relationship with these modern internet applications, which is very different from what people who are born on these, born and grow up in these platforms do. So anyway, I'll stop. I'll pass it back to the group.
One comment about the value of being included in the LLM model, including your but right now right now it doesn't seem like I think all these inference or the model AI model companies are running on a loss, right? For every answer generated, they are running some sort of loss on like the answer given, and probably they are not going to be profitable in the next 5 years, at least it seems. uh, so I don't know if that will ever, maybe in like 15 years some sort of new efficient models come up, maybe then it might change, but right now the economic unit economics doesn't seem it will work.
Arguing the other side for a minute, I think the two reasons to think something like this might work is, I mean, it worked for Google for a while, right? So for at least, I would say, 15 years, they basically had a monopoly on being the market maker for content monetization. It was kind of shitty, but even though other big internet companies made a lot of money in that time, they didn't actually break into this core market of Google's. Like Facebook had its own like advertising type products and so forth, but only Google had the dominant ad-based internet model. So even though you didn't have to sign up for Google AdSense or AdWords, most people did as the baseline, and then they used that as the foundation for cutting bigger deals. Like for a while, I was using AdSense, AdWords as well, and running Amazon affiliate, and a couple of times I took custom ads from random people. Eventually, I stopped using advertising altogether because it just wasn't worth it overall. But if you have enough volume, then it made sense to use Google as the foundation of your, underwrite your ad inventory capacity or whatever. And I think something like that might work with Cloudflare. And I think in both cases, the reason is it's the best of a set of really bad alternatives, because actually doing it right is too hard. Like decentralized, like Ben was saying, is it's much harder than people think. Like I've been exploring IPFS for the last couple of weeks, trying to figure out what's the best way to do something there. And it's really surprising just how even the most basic things don't really work well. Like um, there is no such thing as search-based discovery of content on IPFS. There's like some guy who has like a module that you can download that kind of works like search, but there's no equivalent of like going to a page and saying, hey, give me, I don't know, articles about ancient Rome, and it'll give you a bunch of CIDs on IPFS that talk about ancient Rome. That kind of mechanism, that paradigm doesn't really work on content addressing. So if that's the way you want to go, there's a lot more engineering problems to solve to address this use case. So yeah, there's, I would say, like 5% chance that something like this works out. So it's worth kind of a hedge bet that they'll be the ones to make it work. Because the other thing they have going for them is none of the other big players have an incentive to do this right. Google maybe, but they're already fucking up even search. It's kind of shitty. But again, going back to the critical argument, I don't think they have the visionary leadership required to make this happen. And I also reacted the same way to the kind of like shallow comments about TikTok at the end, and kind of backstory of how he came into the business via law and stuff. He does not sound like a proper tech visionary with interesting ideas about how technology should work. He seems to be more like a social visionary with opinions about the right and moral way to organize society. which even if he's a good guy, is not a great foundation to solve like and major internet infrastructure architecture problems. In a way, this also reminds me of Palantir because Palantir is very similar. Like, if you don't look closely, it looks like this amazing, unique technology product meant for like surveillance state stuff. But you poke at it, it's like a system integrator type company that takes a bunch of relatively commodity modules and puts them together almost like a consulting firm. So their business model is kind of like a consulting firm, and their software isn't really, there's no special sauce there. It's just, integrated stuff. So you need somebody with a better architectural vision to do this, and then maybe it'll get interesting. Any other thoughts? All right. And back to Ethereum next week, and then we'll continue probably with IPFS 2 weeks from now. See you guys in a week. Bye.
See you.